Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucy, and I'm a consultant at Turner and Townsend. We are joined today by Claire Brown, who is one of our senior consultants, also from Turner and Townsend. The purpose of this event is a retrofit information, support, and expertise event, which stands for RISE. It's fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, delivered by Turner and Townsend. Thank you, everyone, again for joining. I will now hand over to Claire, who's going to deliver today's presentation. Thank you so much.
Massive thank you, Lucy, and welcome to everyone. If it's your first time coming to a RISE Masterclass or you've been to loads before, a massive welcome today. As Lucy said, topic of today is tackling overheating in social homes. So hopefully that's what you have signed up to. As always, we kind of go through and have a kind of a range of different kind of things that we touch on, and we will always kind of summarise at the end and then have opportunities for discussion. If you have any really great examples, we always love to hear from you around that. So the session will look a little bit like this. I always really like to think about the definitions of what we're talking about, because sometimes terminology can be a bit of a challenge. So by really outlining what the definitions are, it can be really helpful. Thinking about the context as well as the policy, thinking about how fabric is going to be really important in understanding overheating, thinking about some of the key risks to people, understanding some of the strategies, and then we'll pull it all together at the end. As Lucy said as well, you will get a copy of these slides as an attendee in an email following the session. So starting off with some of the definitions here, and some of them you might be really familiar with, others might be really new terminology to you. You might have been looking at retrofit for the past 30 years. You might be in your role and in your third week. So whatever kind of level you are, hopefully these definitions you might have heard of, you might be really familiar with. So it's nice to just have a kind of overview of those to go through. So we've got a couple of definitions on the slide for you at the moment. Overheating is really about the point at which thermal comfort isn't met. So all of us on this call will have a different level of thermal comfort. Some of you will like to be warmer, some of you will like to be cooler. And when we're talking about it in the context of housing, it's around where the indoor temperature has exceeded that level of thermal comfort, making it uncomfortable for whoever is in that property. And that's really key in understanding that we are all individuals, but there will be occasions due to temperature rises that we will all predominantly experience that feeling of being in an overheated space. When we talk about heat gain, it's really about understanding the increasing temperature internally, thinking about what causes that. So it can be things like direct sunlight. It can be things like heat generated from appliances. It can be things around poor ventilation. And so that can, as a heat gain, lead to those higher temperatures, which then make it uncomfortable. This notion of being uncomfortable, and that kind of phrase I used earlier about thermal comfort, is around you being comfortable in that space to undertake the activities that you want to do. So when we're talking about homes, it might be, like lots of us I imagine on this call are home working. So it's about being comfortable in that space to enable you to do the task that you need to. It might be around a bedroom and it being too warm overnight, which is then potentially going to cause you problems with sleep. So again, that kind of thermal comfort is around you finding where your level is and understanding that that might be different for different people within your household. Health risks are absolutely important to recognise here. This is around potential danger to your health from exposure to a particular hazard. For us here, we're talking about the hazard being a too hot home. So if the hazard is that that space is too hot, we need to think about that in the context of risk, think about it in terms of how that could have an impact on our ability to have and exist in that home in a healthy way. When we talk about insulation, it can then be around the material that is used to reduce heat transfer between that interior and external area of the building. Sometimes you might have heard the phrase building envelope. When we have a building that is designed properly and has proper levels of insulation, it can absolutely support that stable internal temperature environment, leading to a nice level of thermal comfort. And that's really with any retrofit project. If it's your own home, you are private owner occupier, you are social housing, whatever it is, you're trying to make sure that your home is not going to be a risk to your health. When we look at other topics, so things like ventilation, what we're talking about in terms of ventilation is that designed movement of air. And quite often we find that there are restrictions in terms of that movement of air. Sometimes it can be unintended. So, for example, if doors or windows have been damaged or are really worn, that can aid unofficial and kind of designed movement of air. So we want to have movement of air because we need it to breathe, but we want to be able to manage it. And particularly around overheating, we want to really be thinking about it. Cooling load is then referring to the amount of cooling that could potentially be needed in that property because we need to cool that space down. And this might be that we need to do that through some sort of mechanical ventilation, through some movement of, it could be an air conditioning unit, it could be multiple other elements, but really thinking about it in terms of how much cooling we might need in that space. We've also included the definition around a smart thermostat to understand that actually we should be managing our heating. And heating is what generally English homes are designed for. We design them to be warm in winter. But increasingly, we need to think about, okay, well, how can we manage this and how can we control this slightly better? And so by having smart thermostats or ones you can control, we can prevent things like heating being left on when we don't need it. That could cause that heat gain in that house or property or bungalow, whatever it might be, when we don't want it. So again, understanding that is going to be really, really important. You might have heard of HHSRS, which is the Housing Health and Safety Rating System. This is a risk-based evaluation tool to really help local authorities protect occupants against risks in their own home. It's around identifying potential deficiencies, and this covers a whole range of issues, but particularly when we're thinking about it in the context of overheating. Overheating can be a risk and therefore a health and safety risk to people within properties. So really understanding that is going to be a really important element to that. You might have also heard of the heat index, and this is the measure of how hot it feels. And this includes both the kind of raw air temperature, but also humidity. And that can really help us in understanding the perceived heat and potential risks that might be associated with those high temperatures that people might be experiencing. So understanding how those all come into play is going to be really important. For this next part around context, we've taken some academic research from Loughborough University and the British Research Establishment, and they did some really nice research around overheating in homes. And they pulled together this based on live monitoring of homes, a whole range of data, and pulled it through together. When they scaled it up to have a look at how this could mean as a bigger issue for the UK, what they found is that 3.6 million English living rooms, English, not UK, were kind of likely to overheat. Now, that's a really big number. 3.6 million living rooms. That's a really big figure to be thinking of. So we know from this research that it's a big issue and we need to be thinking about it. Interestingly, if we do the same scaling up, 4.6 million English bedrooms. Now, we all know that sleep is really important. If we then have a disrupted sleep because of overheating, that's going to be another big challenge for us to deal with. So understanding how this is actually something that needs to be dealt with is really important for any retrofit project. Some of you on the call might have personal experience of when we've had particularly long periods of time with kind of raised temperatures and raised humidity, that actually your sleep has been impacted. So we can think about it personally. We can also think about it professionally. Also, what they found in this research, so again, this is going back to the Loughborough and BRE information, is that they found that the overheating was more prevalent in bedrooms at night than living rooms during the day. So understanding rooms in homes is highlighted here. The prevalence of living room overheating was significantly greater in flats. So again, thinking about your situation, again, if it is your own home, it is you have an estate, you have a number of properties, whatever it is, think about the archetype, think about what this might mean for you. The improved fabric efficiency did not significantly increase the risk of overheating. And this can be a big challenge when talking to anyone about retrofit, is if you think about insulation, it's about movement of thermal properties, isn't it? So if we are adding something, ultimately we're wanting to keep the heat in winter, but we don't want that excess heat in the summer. In the summer, with a improved fabric, we're going to see that actually we're not going to see as much heat coming into that property from external factors. So things like heat coming through walls, that's where we kind of see improved insulation not having a significant impact. Again, it will depend on it's been properly designed, it's been properly installed, because if we have any damage or problems with that insulation, of course, that is still going to lead to this. So this is scenarios where we have had it designed properly, it's been installed properly, and it is performing how we're wanting. Monitored overheating was greater in households living in social housing, particularly around low incomes and with people who identified as over the state pension age. So again, thinking about your community, if you are a social landlord, if you are an individual, thinking about, okay, well, does that kind of impact me? And think about it in the context of any retrofit project. When we look at temperature, it's important to understand trends. So I always like to go back to the science, the data. This is data taken from the Met Office. It is all freely available to you, so you can have a look at the Met Office website and you can find this information to help support you in terms of getting that data and the science, because quite a lot of people really enjoyed that piece. All of the 10 warmest years in record for the UK have occurred since 2002. Heat waves, like we saw in the summer of 2018, are now 30 times more likely to happen due to climate change. And what we see, particularly for regions in the south of England, is that the average hottest day in the summer could have temperatures reaching 40 degrees as an average by the 2070s. So understanding that we need to take action is really highlighted with this data here. When we are thinking about our homes, when we are thinking about the opportunities, it's really good to see what guidance, what information is available to us. So here I've got 3 examples of a kind of standard, the definition and the notes. So we do find that it does vary. So again, when you're thinking about your personal circumstance, really think about the overheating issue and therefore think about, yes, I am impacted. It has an impact on me, but also worthwhile having a look at the guidance that exists. So we've got the CIBSE Environmental Design Guide, we've got the Passive House Planning Package, and we've got Adaptive Thermal Comfort Levels, which is a British standard. So these have different definitions. So CIBSE put it on a limit of 1% annual occupied hours above 28 degrees. The Passive House one has a limit of 10% of the year above 25 degrees. And the Adaptive one sets acceptable indoor comfort temperatures dependent on the running mean outdoor temperature. So they all talk about temperature and they all have particular levels. And when you're kind of trying to understand the home for you, it's about understanding about where that kind of sits. So again, looking at these, utilizing them as resources of further information can be really helpful in planning how you are going to address that overheating issue. So when we have a look at it in terms of those internal causes, so we're thinking about things within the home, and we have a house image here. It could be a flat, it could be a bungalow, it could be a kind of extra care, sheltered housing, whatever it might be. We've gone for a kind of simplified house diagram here. We know that overheating is caused by a buildup of heat, particularly within it. It results in temperatures exceeding a safe limit for those occupants. To assess minimizing that, it's really vital to identify the sources of heat within that property. We don't want a dwelling to be heated intentionally by a heating system within an overheating period. So really have a think about, what exists within that property. So we'll start with domestic hot water systems. We might find that there are heat gains from the pipework, which tend to not be insulated in a dwelling. We might have storage systems that the cylinders are insulated. They might also give off some heat energy. Also linked to that, any kind of pipework associated with those storage systems. Likewise, solar hot water system pipes might not be suitably insulated, which in winter will be really lovely. In a point of overheating, absolutely we don't want that. Occupants are really, really important here. Body heat, although is dependent on the level of activity, can mean that we can see an increase in air temperature. Because we're breathing out, we breathe out water vapor, can increase the moisture content in the air. If we don't have a lot of activity or a lot of people, this might not be something to focus on. The occupant activities are then really important as well. We know that things like cooking, bathing, release heat and give rise to considerable internal gains. What we should also note is that there should be suitable ventilation systems, particularly in kitchens and bathrooms, to purge that room of that excess heat. So again, understanding that is going to be really, really important. When we think about it in terms of the external causes, so the previous slide was about the inside bits, the external causes will again vary from home to home, construction type, archetypes, geographical setting. If you are very kind of southern region based versus kind of the northeast, there will be differences there. It's about understanding what that influence is likely to be. So older buildings where the attics have been converted and the loft insulation hasn't been upgraded efficiently can see significant heat gains. This is most likely due to external surface of the fabric being at a higher temperature of the internal temperatures and seeing that heat transfer. We can see it with windows, so solar gains through windows. Direct gains that occur through glazing can be really significant. Solar energy in the form of sunlight can provide heat to an interior space, but it will be dependent, okay? So we've got a couple of points to just kind of focus on to really think about. So orientation. South-facing windows will, by nature, receive the most sunlight. North will receive the least. Glazing. If there are single pane windows found in older houses, these will allow more heat to pass through compared with double or low, I can never say this word, emissivity windows, which are designed to reduce solar heat gain. Things like external shading. So you might have a property that has some external shading. There might be an overhang, an awning. There might even be external blinds. These can absolutely help with controlling the amount of solar radiation which is coming into that building. There might also be internal shading, so things like curtains, blinds, even things like solar films, again, applied appropriately, designed into that, can prevent that sunlight and the associated heat gain entering the property in the first place. Climate and weather is also really important to mention here. So the intensity of solar gain can vary absolutely on your geographical location, the time of year, and the weather conditions. In sunny, hot climates, we absolutely note that solar gains can be significantly higher. When we look at the high external temperature, that's one of the key kind of points to really start considering about. There are occasions when the external air temperature does not exceed that internally, although the occurrence of this is generally quite low. However, we note that in cities and large urban locations, the local heating of air creates a local environment that might be several degrees warmer than in a rural location. And what we refer to this as the urban heat island impact. So if you haven't heard of that before, this is really about where the nature and the construction is leading to these almost artificially warmer temperatures in an urban and dense location than we might experience in a rural location. So again, when you're thinking about your properties, think about how that might impact you. So building a microenvironment, absolutely thinking about understanding different heat sources that might exist. It might be due to its particular setting. It might be next to less green space, for example. So understanding about how that what exists outside the property is going to be really important. When we look at it in terms of policy, so we've touched on the definitions, we've touched on some of the kind of guidance that is out there, we've looked at some of the internal and external elements. If we go back to the HHSRS, what that looks at is around that solar heat gain, particularly around where we might find this as more prevalent. So in terms of the challenges that have been raised around risks in HHSRS, have really highlighted this issue around heat gain, particularly where we've seen conversions happen. In 2003, the heatwave taught us that small flats and rooms under roofs, particularly of kind of zinc roofs in Paris, experienced significant overheating. And that lack of proper insulation, particularly for that element, really saw an increase in risk of death. What we try and do now is that modern energy efficient dwellings with increased insulation and airtightness are also properties which are noting overheating challenges. And so what we need to do is really understand our space, understand what we need to do, and really move forward in terms of how we can address this, both in terms of our retrofit, but also new properties that we are going to be building. When we're thinking about Fabric First, you might have heard this in terms of a retrofit. It's really thinking about, okay, well, how can we do this? Not only to secure that thermal comfort in winter, but when we're thinking about overheating, it's really thinking about how can we address this. So energy efficient windows with a low U and G value. So they are metric data that is assigned to a particular construction detail that you can get that information about how it's going to perform thermally. It can really prevent overheating in the summer whilst maintaining warmth in winter. Additional thermal mass in walls and floors also reduces that temperature fluctuation. And incorporating solar shading in new homes will absolutely prevent excess solar heat gain and will aim to pursue a comfortable and sustainable living environment for anyone who is in that property. In any building, shading is going to play an important part in keeping that building cool. Choosing fabric curtains can help, but also external shading elements can be proven to be more effective. Even trees will help to keep out the sun. But without appropriate shading in summer, sunlight can quickly increase your indoor temperature. When we look at passive house buildings, these are often designed to make use of the angle of the sun by installing correctly designed shading elements that reduce solar gains in summer, but absolutely allow for solar gain in winter when the angle of the sun is much lower. When we talk about thermal mass, this is about building materials. It's about materials that absorb and release heat in buildings. Many buildings will have what we could refer to as hidden thermal mass due to finishes like carpets, which can lead to a kind of misunderstanding of the performance. Thermal mass can attenuate temperature swings and modelled. It can help us understand the performance to really help us minimize that overheating. Thermal mass itself does not cause overheating in a house, and that's really important to consider. Thermal mass can absolutely help us regulate indoor temperatures and prevent overheating when designed and installed, and importantly maintained as part of that property. We can still, though, see overheating occur with excessive direct sunlight, poor ventilation, inadequate nighttime cooling, or insufficient insulation. So again, It's a very complex issue. We need to make sure that we're getting the understanding there, that the design is there, and that we have that information before we start retrofitting. So here are some examples in terms of the thermal mass of existing dwellings. What we see is this is in a meters and wattage. So understanding how that is going to play through, and really thinking about not just addressing one element, it's about thinking about it in terms of the whole property. One really important thing to think of is that actually we know that we have in England and the UK an ageing housing stock. And along with the increasing demand for cooling, it does possess a challenge in maintaining thermal comfort. Overheating in houses is projected to increase really significantly, and therefore will necessitate us having more resilient and energy efficient homes. For those facing fuel poverty, solar shading and simple strategies can help reduce those overheating risks, but the need for suitable energy efficient and climate resilient housing is crucial. Solutions in practice have been absolutely seen with examples in Norwich with Goldsmith Street, where they included things like brise soleil and they addressed the projected overheating risks. So we know we can do it, and we just need to kind of get going with it. When we're thinking about risks, it's really important to think about it in terms of who's in that property. So when we're thinking about well-being, it's really thinking, okay, what is that person's overall happiness, health and contentment? This can be impacted by overheating living conditions, particularly because it might impact their health risks. High temperatures can lead to heat-related health issues, such as heat exhaustion and heat stroke. These conditions can cause symptoms like dizziness, nausea, rapid heartbeats, and is particularly important to consider for vulnerable individuals, such as the elderly or children or people with particular medical conditions. Dehydration can lead to excessive sweating, which absolutely increases the risk of dehydration. I mentioned before about poor sleep quality. An overheated home can disrupt sleep patterns, leading to insomnia and fatigue, which can impact someone's well-being and productivity. High indoor temperatures can also make living spaces uncomfortable and unpleasant, reducing the quality of life for anyone who lives in that space. Property damage. We can absolutely see this happen through overheating. So overheating can damage sensitive electronics, appliances, and certain materials in the home. It can lead to things like warping or cracking of wood and fading of fabric or furniture. In terms of environmental damage, if a building is fitted with a cooling system to challenge overheating, it can absolutely contribute to higher carbon emissions and the environmental impact. And last but not least, reduced indoor air quality. Overheating can result in stagnant air, reducing ventilation, and potentially lead to poor indoor air quality, which in turn can exacerbate respiratory issues. When we think about people, absolutely, we will know if we have a large portfolio, or we will know individually that certain people will absolutely be more at risk than others. This is a very kind of broad brush approach to highlighting some of those sectors, those particular kind of tenant segmentation information. You also might have certain vulnerabilities in your portfolio that actually don't come under this. So again, really be specific, always look at the bespoke nature of what your projects are. So older people over 75, female particularly, those people who live on their own or in a care home, absolutely probably won't be a surprise. People who have serious or long-term health issues, people on multiple medicines that might then need to take more because of the temperature. Those who find it hard to temperature regulate, so babies and the very young, people who are bedbound. Also linked into this is around people with substance reliance. That can be prescribed or not prescribed drugs, also alcohol addictions, and interestingly, Alzheimer's disease is highlighted here as well as people who spend a lot of time outside in hot places. If you are an external contractor, particularly kind of grounds maintenance, landscaping, those kind of job roles, can mean that you are potentially already exposed to high temperatures and therefore actually it will be a challenge in your home as well. It's also top floor flats. We know that heat rises, so the heat's got to go somewhere. The homeless as well, that exposure to temperatures externally, as well as those who are potentially home working. We might have historically been really used to working in a air-conditioned office with a kind of managed ventilation system. We're now working at our home. We might be on the kitchen table. There isn't necessarily the design there that when the property was first built, that it was designed for someone to be working at home. So all of these are challenges, these are risk profiles to really start thinking about. Linking into the home itself, so going back to that kind of idea of archetypes, flats on the top, absolutely, I just mentioned about heat rising. Homes with openable windows on just one side of the property, it means that there is less of an opportunity for cross ventilation. So I know that I have a window at the front that I keep open, window at the back that I keep open, the air can move through. Homes with little shading from the sun, either externally or internally. Large east, west or south facing windows which do not have shade from the sun. Restrictions on the openability of windows. So this might be around security. It could also be around noise. Also high rises. Windows tend to not be massively openable because of safety and security. So again, thinking about how we can understand homes is going to then be important in understanding what the risk factors might be to then enable us to think about what we can do. So importantly, when we're thinking about it, understanding the fabric is going to be really, really important. I love the use of thermal imaging cameras, and that's what this picture is. It can be really powerful in understanding and highlighting where that heat might be coming from, particularly with uninsulated pipes, because you might not be able to see them. So using something like a thermal imaging camera can be a really useful exercise to do. Your organisation might have one. It might be something that you can rent or lease. Some energy companies also let you borrow them. So again, lots of opportunities there to explore that. So smart thermostats can absolutely monitor the indoor temperature and send alerts to your phone if there's a particular excessive temperature reached. They can also provide real-time data on temperature levels, and if you have cooling, can provide that remote control. Temperature sensors can be placed in different areas of a home to monitor that indoor temperature. Particularly if you're doing a retrofit project with PAS 2035, there is a requirement for monitoring. So this might be something to really explore, particularly if overheating has been a challenge. Again, it can be really useful in terms of alerting that potential to overheating, and can be designed for the particular tenants. I've touched on cameras already. Really useful tool. There is a cost to kind of potentially borrowing those, but can be really powerful to be able to use that. Lots of organisations have kind of overheating risk tools that can really help designers identify some factors that can result in overheating. Can be really useful to use those. And I recommend thinking about also maintenance records from tenants or residents. If you are a landlord to someone, asking them about it. If you want more information, though, kind of overheating, the Committee on Climate Change has some really great information around that. Ventilation is important, we know, not just for overheating, but for damp and mould. Really important in making sure that we get it right. So for those of you who know about building regulations, Part F of the UK building regulations is where we find ventilation. Part L is then energy efficiency, and Part O is around overheating. So understanding that's really important. It's around maintaining comfort, having a good ventilation system, and it will be different depending on what the archetype is, depending on what's going to be most suitable. So natural ventilation is around openable windows to create cross ventilation, allowing cool air to enter from one side and warm air to exit from the other. Night cooling is around opening windows during cooler nighttime hours to allow that fresh air to circulate and to cool down the interior. Things like window treatments, this can be around blinds, shades, curtains, roof vents. Again, it might be appropriate for the property that you have. Installing roof vents or solar chimneys to create that stack effect. The stack effect is when it's drawing warm air upwards and allowing cooler air to enter from below. It's very much the kind of building physics kind of discussion and information coming in there. Things like extractor fans, particularly kitchens, bathrooms, to remove, that heat and humidity. It's also, an opportunity to make sure that that fresh air is being kind of included. Consider the whole house mechanical ventilation system, if that is something that might be identified by a designer to be needed. And then we touched on this before about lofts, attics, roof, making sure that we've got that good level of insulation to reduce that heat transfer from the roof to the living space. So we've got some options there for kind of ventilation. Solar shading, some really nice examples here. This is taken from the Good Homes Alliance. Thinking about reducing that impact of solar radiation, literally blocking that sun's rays from getting into the property. Thinking about keeping those indoor spaces cool. We love greenhouses because they grow, can grow us vegetables and kind of promote that heat. But we need to be thinking about, preventing that heat for our home from coming in. So if there is a lot of glazing, how might we be able to do that? Dispersing that solar energy before it enters the home. So shading those windows. Thinking about passive cooling as well, different options for kind of having that level of cooling come in. Reducing heat, improving energy efficiency of appliances, thinking about lighting in particular. LED lighting is super efficient at converting energy to light. Old kind of incandescent bulbs were obviously quite warm to the touch, so they gave out heat as well as light. So if those are still present in your properties, that's a really great point to think about, is replacing lighting for energy efficiency, but also to reduce the heat gain, and also kind of protecting those interior furnishes to stop that damage from occurring. We might absolutely need to have some sort of cooling. We might see in certain circumstances that actually this is a solution. It will also lead to potential supporting of prevention of damage to the assets. But it should be noted that air conditioning, comfort cooling consumes electricity. So we will know that there will need to be availability for the person in that property to be able to pay for that cooling. So if we can do other measures first, which are less financially intensive, that's going to be a really important option. The environmental impact of air conditioning as well is something to note. So if you have a sustainability strategy, you report on your scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. Air conditioning units use refrigerants that are significantly more potent as a greenhouse gas, which then in turn feeds into the impacts of greenhouse gases. So again, really thinking about how we can possibly do this without creating significantly more environmental impacts. Of course, the human health risk factor is going to be one of the predominant things here. So think about the different measures first, and then think about how cooling demand might be part of this. We do know that reversible heat pumps are something that would be available. So they will provide heat in the winter when we need it, but also provide cooling in the summer. And particularly linked with a solar generation can be a really powerful element to really think of. Just touching on some more of the details, if you are really interested in the topic, do have a look at the resources. You'll get these slides so you can have a look through as well. Things like CIBSE TM59 design methodology, identifying how you can do that, a really comprehensive approach in addressing overheating in properties. It covers things about like dynamic simulations, threshold criteria, different ways that you can use climate data, the different passive strategies, cooling, occupants, influence as well, adaptive retrofit focus, evaluation, collaboration. So if that is of interest to you, I'd really recommend getting a hold of that documentation as well. As I touched on earlier, past 2035, we need to be thinking about that preparation, that delivery and post retrofit, a really kind of important element, thinking about the number of properties, the considerations of risk, linking into other strategies that your organisation might have, not having an over reliance on cooling technology, but thinking about fabric first as well. Making sure people are at the heart of it, mitigating those risks in terms of thinking about the assessments that you're making for that property to design the appropriate retrofit application, as well as thinking about the post-occupancy. People at the heart of everything, really important. It might be that you are the residents and therefore, think about it in terms of their homes, thinking about how you can shade windows, how you can open windows, thinking about the use of electric fans. These can be really suitable if the air temperature is below 35 degrees. What it is important to say is don't direct that directly to you, but use it to move the air past you, and that will see a much better kind of benefit. It sounds silly. I've been into homes in the summer that have still had the heating on. So making sure that actually it is turned off, and it should be turned off, can be a really important one. Things like moving to a cooler part of the house. I'm talking to you from a north-facing back bedroom because it is a cooler location than my south-facing front. So again, thinking about where rooms are, possibly flipping lounges, flipping bedrooms to make it more comfortable. We're trying to get that level of thermal comfort, thinking about other opportunities for tenants, residents, individuals to find cooling in other locations, particularly public buildings, also religious locations. If you look at local communities, quite often we've seen that places of worship can open up as a cool place for people to go. So again, signposting people to those kind of premises, linking in with other agencies that you might be local to. And again, that switching of rooms, where does the room need to be? Thinking about it in terms of the landlord consideration, understanding the home, understanding the residents, thinking about the local context, your geographical setting. Are you urban? Are you rural? Are you coastal? Are you inland? Think about the design that exists already. What is the archetype? Do we already get that feedback from people who are living in those homes about heat gain, about problems with ventilation, making sure we understand that everyone has the right to be in a home that is not going to cause them risks and health factors. So really linking back to HHSRS, thinking about if we need to relocate someone, because that might actually need to happen, thinking about vulnerabilities, risk, and think about your support protocols. What have you got already in place to really support tenants, to enable them to stay in their home, but also not experience significant overheating that means that they are really uncomfortable and that they are challenged in that space. So in conclusion, we're really saying that overheating is something that needs to be on the agenda. We know that climate change is happening. We know that it's a result of our impacts, and we know that we are experiencing it. We have the data from the Met Office, and we have the information from the Committee on Climate Change to understand that actually this is something that we need to really be thinking of. We know that different archetypes will have their risks. We should really be focusing on addressing those non-mechanical, non-electrified systems, to consider fuel poverty in this. But absolutely, we need to communicate this. We need to be clear, we need to be transparent and provide that information and support, because all of us are likely to experience overheating in various different kind of scales and experiences. And so it is going to be something that we all have to address going forward. If you haven't already done the RISE self-assessment form, I'm hoping that Lucy will pop this link in the chat for us as well. If you'd like more access to more of the RISE information, resources, support for your retrofit project, please do complete this. If you already have, you will already be in the system. So thank you very much for doing that. I always like to signpost to other resources. You will have the links in the slides, so you'll be able to kind of click into those. Absolutely Good Homes Alliance, IEMA, which is the Institute of Environmental Management Assessment, also has a nice piece on that, as well as CIBSE in terms of their design methodology. The NHS has some really great advice, particularly coming from a human health risk perspective around information you can share with tenants, residents, or you personally might like to have a kind of a look and a reference to that to really help you understand how that can help you as well. Also, we have some upcoming masterclasses that might be really useful for you. We've just highlighted 2 here for you, but there are some other ones coming up as well. So if you think about software modeling, so using a particular piece of software to help you understand overheating in the context of that, as well as retrofit opportunities, we have that one there. The link on Eventbrite will hopefully work for you. We also have one about heritage. So we know that a lot of historical properties kind of perform in different ways to more recently built properties. So we have a really nice masterclass on that just coming up. If you do have queries or questions, please do ask. I've seen a couple pop up in the chat, so I will address those when I finish these slides. If you do want to contact us, please do rise@turntown.co.uk. We have really fabulous colleagues who look after that inbox. If they can't answer it themselves, they will kind of grab one of our subject matter experts to be able to answer your query. And likewise, have a look at the website. So riseretrofit.org.uk. That's where you'll find all the links, different pieces of information, the recordings from other ones. There'll be a link you can click on there, and you can share those with other colleagues that you might want to.